It's time to talk hockey with the Utah Mammoth and NHL insider on KSLSports.com, Cole Bagley on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Top of the hour, this 5 o'clock hour is brought to you by the good folks at Trajan Wealth, TRAJAN Wealth.com. Trajan Wealth for all your trusted local needs in retirement. And Cole Bagley appearing, brought to you by Hercules First Federal Credit Union. Growing stronger together. I read both of the hat trick pieces that you guys put together after those two 4-1 losses over the weekend. I know that there's no such. I mean, I don't know. Human nature's funny, and how teams can act after you already know you clinched the playoffs. I know that this team isn't going out there and going halfway. I think this is more a function of how competitive the NHL is all the time. Even it doesn't matter what night it is or what game it is in the season or what team you're playing. Those guys want to beat the crap out of you, and I think that the Mammoth fell victim to that, Cole.
Yeah, they did for sure. Especially, looking at the schedule, the Carolina Hurricanes were never really a game that I circled as a win or a game that was going to go particularly well for the Mammoth. I mean, that's a team that could win the Stanley Cup this year. And even though they were missing a few players and a couple of their guys didn't play as many minutes, that's a really good team. And it's a team that just plays a style that Utah struggles to keep up with. They play with a lot of speed, but they play very disruptive hockey. They're a very physical team, and they just created havoc all over the ice, and Utah struggled to keep up. And then, I don't know that the schedule was overly helpful for the Mammoth as well. They lose to Carolina at Delta Center. They have to jump on a plane that night. They go to Calgary, and obviously the Flames are one of the worst teams in the NHL. But like you said, there's no nights off. There's no easy games, and
not at their place. Certainly, when you look at how well they did at home, like you can't take those guys for granted. Yeah,
exactly. And Calgary had nothing to lose. I mean, they could play any way, and it wouldn't have mattered. And it just. I think for Utah, a lot of fans are. It's funny. I feel like we've graduated. The fan base has graduated to really high expectations already. I mean, hockey's only existed here for, the NHL's only been here for 2 seasons, but I feel like we're dealing with, fans that have been around for a really long time because there is no room for error. They get really upset if this team loses a couple games in a row. A couple nights ago, it's, we're going to win the Stanley Cup. And, last night after loss, it's, fire the coaching staff. It's the worst thing in the world. But, I just think, for this team, they're still experiencing growing pains. Most of these guys have never played in the playoffs before. And if they have, it was just a handful of games. And, yeah, you have your Ian Coles and your Sergachevs and your Nate Schmitz and what have you that have won cups and are experienced. But for the most part, a lot of these guys have never touched the playoffs, and they're still growing. And, they're as Bill Armstrong said, their best team is not here yet. And so there's still going to be growing pains. There's still going to be times where, they have some inconsistencies. And, the biggest thing for Utah finishing out these last 2 games is to rediscover their identity and to be able to play Mammoth hockey and to get back to playing consistent hockey. Because if they do that, they're going to be a handful no matter who they draw in the first round. But if they don't and they play like they did the last 2 games, well, it could be a pretty quick series.
We could have panicked a couple weeks ago when they had that tough stretch and they had that weird game against the Capitals, and they turn around and they win 4 straight and they clinch playoff berth. So we know this team's going to be able to forget the last 2 games pretty easily. But was there anything you saw out of these last 2 games that gives you concern moving forward, things that they need to improve on before they get into an intense playoff series?
Not really. I think it was just a combination of you played the best team in the East, you turned around and jumped on a plane and, went up to Canada and played a team that had nothing to lose. And, I think they had kind of exhausted themselves a little bit over the last, they won 5 straight and a lot of high emotions. And, for me, the losses just kind of came back to a lack of effort. They came out flat in both games, and they struggled to really get going and struggled to get into their game. So, yeah, there's nothing overly worrisome. I think, if you wanted to point to one thing, it's probably that, the goaltending situation, Vejmelka's fine. I just don't know that it's been Vanacek has been a good fit. I would be surprised if they rely on him whatsoever. As soon as the playoff starts, I would anticipate that you're going to see Vejmelka every single night, especially, I mean, who knows how far Utah is going to go. So, it's not out of the ordinary to kind of play that way, but it's certainly unfortunate that they don't really trust their backup goaltender, and that's something that going beyond this season they're going to have to address stepping into the summer whenever that time comes. But yeah, overall, I don't think it's anything to really worry about. Utah. For Utah, it's about deciding to play their game. It's about having the maturity and the energy to be consistent. And, like I said before, I just don't think that they have that over these last two.
Cole, one of the things that we've seen, obviously, with the fight in the Pacific, and we're trying to figure out what team Utah would end up facing, it looks like it would probably be Vegas. Does Vegas look like a team that can just turn it on immediately? I feel like any team could do that in the Stanley Cup playoffs, but I look at it, JJ brought this up to me. According to Vegas, they have the third best odds to win the Stanley Cup behind the Avs and the Hurricanes. And I thought, well, that seems like it's overshot. But going to the playoffs is something you can't replace, and that's a team who's been there quite a bit from the very get-go. Yeah.
Vegas is definitely one of those teams that's just kind of built for the playoffs. Their game translates over to the postseason incredibly well. So, if Utah is to draw them in the first round, they need to kind of expose their weaknesses. And I think a lot of that is defensively and net. Their goaltending has, struggled to remain consistent. It's been definitely a struggle for them in a lot of different areas. They haven't really found their groove. They've kind of bounced between the two, between Hill and Hart, and I don't really feel like either guy has really asserted himself as a number one starter. So, I think what's positive for Utah is, they're gonna be a problem no matter who they face, whether it's Vegas or Edmonton, Anaheim, Colorado. I don't think anybody really wants to play Utah because, Utah is so hungry, and they kind of have, I think, spoiler written all over them. I think they're a team that could go into the first round and could make noise against just about anybody. And I think, certainly against, Vegas or Anaheim, I think those are if they face either of those teams, I think that's a series that Utah could potentially pull an upset and beat them. But it's going to, again, come down to Utah having maturity and consistency and deciding to play with those things. And I think the key, if they were to play Vegas, would be, in addition to, exploiting their weaknesses, would be, going down to Vegas and continuing to dominate. Because they've had a lot of success in that building. I think of the 3 wins against Vegas, or maybe 4, I believe that 2 or 3 of those have come, on the road. And most recently, they took care of business in commanding fashion about a month ago when they played the Golden Knights down there. So, for Utah, yeah, Vegas can be a scary team. They have the experience, a lot of guys that have won Stanley Cups on that roster, some of the best players in the league. I mean, Jack Eichel is arguably the second or third best American player in the National Hockey League. Then you couple that with, Stone, and then you've got to worry about Marner and a handful of other guys. So, offensively, that's a team that can do some damage, but I think their weak spot is defensively and certainly between the pipes.
Hey, sweetie, your mother showed me this Carvana thing for selling the car. I'm going to give it a try. Wish me luck. Me again. I put in the license plate. It gave me an offer. Unbelievable. Okay, I accepted the offer. They're picking it up Tuesday from the driveway. I haven't even left my chair. It's done. The car's gone. I'm holding a check. Anyway, Carvana, give it a whirl. Love ya.
So good, you'll want to leave a voicemail about it. Sell your car today on Carvana. Pickup fees may apply.
I know the analytics favor the Mammoth to hold on to this wild card 1 spot, but the way the last couple of games have gone, and with the Kings winning 4 straight, what's the margin for error here for Utah if they don't finish business here to slip and fall that second spot?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they just need to take care of business. 93 kind of remains the magic number for them as of right now. If they can pick up a win and at least an overtime point out of their last 2 games, that would pretty much wrap it all up and help them secure the top wildcard spot. But the Pacific is just wild right now. I mean, there is a scenario where, maybe Anaheim continues to lose and LA jumps them, and then Utah's in a race, a closer race for that top wild card spot between. It could be Anaheim, it could be Edmonton, but luckily Utah has the tiebreakers in a lot of fashion. When you look at, regulation wins and then regulation wins plus overtime wins combined, I think Utah would have the tiebreaker over the Ducks. And then as of right now, they would have it over Edmonton. So, for Utah, there's no reason for them to not lock it up. Obviously, they slipped a little bit. They've let their guard down. They lost 2 in a row, but that's a team that, before they lost 2 in a row, they won 5 straight against some very, very good teams to lock up a playoff spot. So, again, it comes down. It feels like every night, you wonder which team you're going to get. Are you going to get the dangerous team that can beat anybody, that can play anybody, that plays with confidence? Or are you going to get the team that, maybe just doesn't have the energy, that lacks that confidence, that lacks that connection? And it's a decision. And, that's a conversation that, I've had with a lot of the guys, a lot of the veterans, the Ian Coles and the Nate Schmitz, and even head coach Andre Tourny. A lot of the times it's getting this young team, this inexperienced team, to decide, who they're going to be on a nightly basis. And, I would imagine that, they're hungry and they want to lock up that top wildcard spot, because if you don't, you drop to wildcard 2, you have to face the best team in the league in the Colorado Avalanche. Now, I don't hate that matchup necessarily, but if you can help yourself a little bit and you can face one of the more inferior teams, a team that's you're going to match up better against, and potentially move on to the second round, obviously you're going to want to take those chances.
The young core that you mentioned, and we've talked about all year, their first go in the playoffs, and are the Stanley Cup playoffs the type of place that these young guys, this group in particular, who you followed so closely, do you feel like that this is a group that goes, we were built for this, or it's one where you go, you know what, get this year under your belt, and then you know what the Stanley Cup playoffs feel like, and then on to next year? No,
I think, based on a lot of the conversations that I've had with that young kind of core group, with the Logan Cooley's and Dylan Gunthers, and I would even, throw guys like Clayton Keller and Nick Schmaltz. They're obviously a little bit older, but they're very inexperienced. Those are guys that have played very few playoff games. And, they all recognize that, hey, we achieved our goal of getting into the playoffs. That's what we said that we were going to do. We did that. Hooray. But they're hungry. That's not good enough for them. They don't want to just get in and lose in 5 or 6 games and go, well, good. That was great, guys. I guess we'll build on it from there. No, they want to go in and shock the world. Not necessarily win a Stanley Cup, but I think, if these guys were able to push, one of the top seeds to 6 or 7 games, or, potentially even win a series and move on to the second round, that's what they want. That's what they want to do. They're not afraid of anybody, and they know that they possess the skill in order to do that, right? Dylan Gunther scored 40 goals this season, and Clayton Keller is on pace for, I think, 87 points, which would be the second most in his career. And Nick Schmaltz is having a career season. And, you go back to even, some of the other younger guys. Logan Cooley has kind of started to break out and show that he's a legitimate, potential future, superstar. So for Utah, they appreciate, that they achieved their goal, but this is just the beginning. There is so much more for them to accomplish, and why not now? Why not, gather as much playoff, experience as possible and make it hard on one of those higher seeds.
We here in Utah, we're just so excited about being in the NHL and being in the playoffs that we don't worry about some of these things that other fan bases grind their gears about. But I know that the playoff format is something that a lot of people around the league, a lot of fans around the league don't like. I'm curious to get your take on it. What is your opinion on the format? And have you heard anybody or anything talk about the potential of it getting changed back to the way it used to be?
I don't like it. I think there were some meetings between the general managers of the league and, of course, Bettman. I want to say maybe a month or 6 weeks ago, where they kind of, they were discussing things, right? I think this is an annual meeting that they have, and there were some GMs that had voiced their opinions on the playoff format, and they go, we worked so hard, all season long. We we try to, dominate the divisions that we're in, but then, we get to the first round of the playoffs and we're facing teams. And I believe that Bill Guerin is one of those general managers that has an issue with it because, this is a guy that his team is I think, the third or fourth best team in the entire National Hockey League. But they're in the Central Division, right? And so being in the Central Division means that in the first round, they have to face the Dallas Stars. And so you have two teams that are cup contenders. One of them is going to be out in the first round. And, Bettman's response to that is, well, there's no first round in professional sports like the Stanley Cup playoffs. We get the best matchups. We get these incredible teams facing off that make for really, really good games. But at the end of the day, wouldn't you rather have those matchups in, at a minimum, the second round or, the conference championship? Isn't that when you want these top-tier teams beating each other out instead of the first round? And I get it. Those games are incredibly competitive, and, yeah, they're exciting. But it just, I'd have to agree with those general managers that have an issue with it because, for Bill Guerin and the Minnesota Wild, they went all in on, adding Quinn Hughes to their roster with the hopes of proving to him to come back. But if they lose in the first round, I don't know that he's necessarily going to come back. They obviously understood that. Wasn't a secret. It's not like somebody pulled a fast one on him and said, oh, well, guess what? You brought in Quinn Hughes, but you're going to have to face the Dallas Stars. No, they definitely knew that. But I agree. I think that the best matchup should be, second, third, and then, of course, the finals. Having two of the best teams in the league having a face-off in the first round, sure, it's fun, but I don't really think it's fair because what value is there in dominating your division? What value is there in playing incredibly well if you have to face another really, really good team to start things off?
Cole Bagley, our Mammoth insider for KSLSports.com, always hooking you up with the best info on this team in this market. Cole, lastly, this will be Bear's first go on the bench as the head coach in a playoff series. What does Bear bring to the playoffs that are going to what are some of his qualities that are going to be something that helps him be a winner in the playoffs?
I think just a continued hunger. An ability to continue to grow. I mean, that's what he's done year over year since he took this thing over when they decided to move on from their previous coach and hit reset. I mean, he's been there all along the way, and every single season they've improved in terms of their points making progress. And obviously, he's done exactly what the front office wanted him to do. Now, it hasn't necessarily been the prettiest. There's been ups and downs, and I'm certain that there were times over the last two seasons where that seat, started to heat up a little bit. But, he's just as hungry, as the rest of these guys. And I think the team, responds well to that. I think they feed off of him a little bit, and he has incredibly high expectations, which I think is good, right? You don't want to go into this, playoff debut for this franchise and, just be there. That's not good enough. That's not, what's going to result in winning a Stanley Cup, hopefully in 4 or 5, 6 years down the road. But, going in with a desire to win, with a confidence to win, and, kind of wanting to shock the world and show people that, Utah isn't just a team that's going to make the playoffs, but they're going to be tough to beat. They're going to be tough to deal with. And eventually, they are going to enter into a championship window. So, yeah, we'll see how things go, but it's going to be a lot of fun. There's nothing at all like playoff hockey, and I think that this team is well suited, and I think they've got the right leadership in place to make things interesting and to make some noise here in the next week.
Cole, we're looking forward to these playoffs, man. Thanks for hanging out with us. We'll talk to you again.
All right, thanks, boys.
There you go.
Thanks, Cole.
Cole Bagley. We have more around the corner. 97.5 KSL Sports Zone.